My name's Danielle Hitch and I'm the Allied Health Research and Translation Lead here at Western Health. I think I came to research by accident, to be honest with you. I wasn't sort of the typical research nerd at undergraduate level. I actually scraped through my undergraduate training and then went out and was a clinician for 10 years and really enjoyed that. And then I think sort of after that time I started getting more of an itch for, well, why do we practice the way we do? And we could be doing this so much better in so many ways. I started with a couple of clinical research projects that I just did as a clinician. One on outcome measures and a couple of others that I did just as part of my role. By that stage I was a senior OTA in mental health. And then I did my master's degree when I was in the UK, and that was about engagement in occupation, so it was a really core OT study. And I was working with people with severe and enduring mental health problems at the time, so it helped my practice to understand how people engage with occupations and what helps and what doesn't. So I think I've kept occupation really central to my research throughout, because it's the relationship between health and occupation is the reason I became an OT, and it's the reason for what I do. And when all else fails and there's so much chaos and you're trying to figure out what the hell you're trying to do, that's the core of who we are. And I've seen so many examples over the years of how that relationship can be used as a tremendously powerful force for good. I think, especially doing some research around Wilcox's work, so doing, being, becoming and belonging. As part of my PhD, I worked up the pan-occupational paradigm, and the core of that is doing, being, becoming and belonging. And every piece of research I do, no matter what it is, when you boil it all down to occupation, it is about doing, being, becoming and belonging. It's kind of like this heartbeat that's underneath everything. So I'm yet to find anything in my research that doesn't actually conform to that. And I think that's a really powerful kind of idea. I think my research has changed my practice in big ways and specific ways. So in the big ways, it has, the longer I go in research, the more sort of militantly OT I become. I sort of really focus in on that core relationship. But specifically, if you learn from every single research project. So I think oftentimes you start a research project and you assume you know the answer, or you think you know what you're going to find, and 80% of what you find might conform with that. But there's always something that's unusual or that you weren't expecting. So when I did some research in London with people who had severe and enduring mental health problems, but also with staff, I kind of presumed at that point in my career that the staff and the consumers were on the same page about what helps you engage. Broadly they were, but there were some areas that were really very different. And so when I continued working as a clinician, I took that into account, that clinicians weren't necessarily seeing things the way I thought they saw them. And I made sure that I always double checked with the consumer, which sounds really basic and what you should do anyway. But the research helped me really get that, okay, you need to actually ask the person, what is stopping you from doing this, and not just assume. Research questions are key, and you should spend all your time doing that. Because if you get your research question well ordered so that it's answerable and it actually is asking what you want to know, the rest will flow from there. And working a lot with clinicians to build capacity around it, it's oftentimes people will come to me and say, I've got this great idea and I know what data I'm going to collect and this is what I'm going to find, and they've already gone way down the process and they haven't actually spent time with the question. So I think it's worth investing significant time in getting your question right, rewriting it and rewriting it and rewriting it, because once you've done that, the rest will design itself. So I try to make sure that the question is framed in a really easy to understand way. I hate the fact that when you read a lot of journal articles, it's kind of academic speak, and even I don't understand with all my experience what they're talking about sometimes because they're using such different language. So I really try to make my research questions as plain and straightforward as possible, so that when I go on to present the findings, I can say, well, I asked this and here's the answer. And that's really what research is about, it's answering the questions properly. Yeah, I mean, I think my research training through doing the Masters and the PhD definitely helped, so that doing that training is a good investment to learn the techniques of how to do it. I also teach it, because I teach it at Deakin, so if you have to teach something, you have to learn how to do it quite well. But I think it's also a lot of practice, but it's also about getting lots of feedback. So if you've worked out a research question, always get someone else to look at it and always ask them, do you think this is answerable? Does this mean what I think it means? You can't work on your own as a researcher, you've got to have a team around you. And the best person to ask often is the clinician. Is this a relevant research question? Is this a question that's going to matter? A good way to think about developing research methods is that there's a whole toolkit of research methods. And every time I approach a study, I look into my toolkit and I figure out, well, which sort of configuration is going to answer my question. So I think a lot of the discussions in OT are about, randomised control trials, systematic reviews, and it kind of puts method before the question, kind of like putting the cart before the horse. It doesn't really matter what method you use as long as it's relevant to your question. So I think, like most people, most of my training was in quantitative methods. And then I've sort of branched out more into qualitative methods because I think you get such depth from those. But now I would describe myself as a mixed methodologist. Most of the things I do, I have mixed methods. A little bit of quant, bit of qual, and how you put them together. You get fantastic depth from doing that, especially in sort of clinical studies where you may not have a massive sample, but you still get lots and lots of data. I'm really interested too in some of the creative methods out there, so things like photo voice and creative arts methods, and I think for some consumers that's a really good way of getting good participation and actually getting people's thoughts down, especially for those consumers where an interview like this is just not going to work for them for whatever reason. So traditionally, clinicians always had the option of doing bits and pieces of research in their workplaces, but now there's positions like mine here at Western, which is explicitly one foot in academia, one foot in practice. So my role here is to build capacity for clinicians who want to do research, and that might involve helping them get into academia, or it may not. I think clinician researchers play a massive role in getting research done that really matters on the ground. So you don't have to be an academic to be a researcher, but it is one of the pathways, and it's a well-supported pathway if you go that way. Find a team, and you need a team. There's a really good quote that says, if you want to be first, go alone. If you want to go far, go with a team, and it's true. I never do things on my own. So pal up with someone who's done research before, because you don't want to be reinventing the wheel, and that I often see clinicians do that just through lack of experience. They waste a lot of time doing things that are unnecessary. If they'd spoken to someone who's done research, you don't have to do all that. So find someone who's experienced, but also really think about who's in your team. So for example, I'm really good at big picture, terrible at details and paperwork, and I will always be terrible at details and paperwork. So whatever I'm working on, I try to have someone in the team who's good at that. So I think part of it is starting from an understanding of your strengths and weaknesses, and then trying to get people around you who will fill all the gaps. And a diverse team is really good too. So I think if you're doing OT research, it's nice to have a team of OTs. But if you have one person who's not an OT, that person's going to ask you some really good questions and challenge your thinking. I think the most critical skills for a researcher is to have a properly open mind. Because I think if you get into a little groove of how you do research and you don't consider other opportunities or other ways of doing it that might not be traditional or how you've done it before, you lose a lot. And I think having an open mind leaves you open to how this particular topic may not be exactly about what you're looking at, but you could still learn a lot from it. And I also think it's that thing, if you don't know what you're going to find, you really don't. So if you're going to approach research with the right mindset, you've got to have the humility, I guess, to be like, I actually don't know what I'm going to find, and keep your mind open to all possibilities. Because sometimes in the findings you'll find something that hurts a bit. Someone's done something to a consumer that you think is appalling and you get very upset. You have to care about your research. Research is tough and you have to be persistent. So if you don't care about it, really care about it, you won't last the distance. So you have to have a sense of persistence. And I think over time, the people who mentor you can help you develop a bit of a thick skin, because you need that as well. If you're going to be doing research and doing peer review, you're going to get lots of rejections, lots of knockbacks, lots of challenges. And the best way to build that thick skin is to have people around you saying, yeah, it's part of what it is. Sadly, I've seen lots of clinicians who've written a journal article, gotten a very rough peer review back, and that's it, they've just pulled out. So that's why you need that team around you to say, these things happen and you can grow from them. But I think one of the great strengths of occupational therapy is that we're not fully aligned with the traditional scientific model. And I think as time goes on, that's being recognised more and more as a strength, not a problem, which is how it used to be seen. So the future is bright. I think research offers heaps of opportunities, and you don't have to be a researcher to do research. I think knowledge translation, actually what you do with the research is more important in many ways than the research itself. So I think OTs are really, really good at practice change. We're good at managing multiple relationships, and we're good at working with resistance, and we're good at understanding how this little change that's come from an article is going to impact on this person, that system. We get the holistic stuff really well. So I think by all means get into research. It's a fantastic thing to do, and it's a really worthy thing to do. But whenever you do research, think about the so what, and think about what are you going to do with it. So publication should never be the end. It should just be the start of what you're actually going to do with all this new knowledge that you've got.